Picture this. You're holding a book in your hands right now that contains the private thoughts of the most powerful man in the world from nearly 2,000 years ago. Not his public speeches or official decrees, but his personal diary, raw, unfiltered reflections on life, death, duty, and human nature. This book is Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and the fact that you can read it today is nothing short of miraculous. Think about it. This text has survived the fall of Rome, the Dark Ages, Viking raids, the Crusades, 2 world wars, and countless other catastrophes that have wiped entire civilizations from history. So, how did a Roman emperor's personal journal make it from his tent on the Germanic frontier in 180 AD to your bookshelf today? The answer is one of the greatest preservation stories in human history. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire at its peak from 161 to 180 AD. He controlled territory stretching from Britain to the Euphrates, commanded 30 legions, and held the power of life and death over 60 million people. Yet despite all this power, he spent his final years fighting barbarian tribes along the Danube frontier. And it was there, in his military tent, that he wrote what we now call the Meditations. But here's the crucial thing. Marcus never intended these writings to be published. The original Greek title, te eis heauton, literally means things to himself. These were private notes, personal reminders about how to live virtuously and cope with the burdens of leadership. He was essentially having a philosophical conversation with himself, working through ideas about mortality, duty, and what it means to be human. When Marcus died in 180 AD, probably from plague in his camp near present-day Vienna, he left behind 12 books of these personal reflections. But unlike his official correspondence or imperial edicts, there was no imperial bureaucracy tasked with preserving these private thoughts. Their survival would depend entirely on chance, individual dedication, and a chain of anonymous scribes stretching across centuries. The first miracle is that the Meditations survived the immediate aftermath of Marcus's death at all. His son Commodus, who succeeded him, was far more interested in gladiatorial games than philosophy. The empire itself began its slow decline, facing plague, economic crisis, and constant warfare. During these early centuries, the Meditations existed as a handful of manuscript copies, probably circulating among educated elites in Constantinople and other major cities. We know virtually nothing about who preserved these texts or how many copies existed. What we do know is that by the 10th century, at least one complete manuscript had made it to the Byzantine Empire's capital. This is where geography becomes crucial. While Western Europe descended into the Dark Ages and countless classical texts were lost forever, the Byzantine Empire maintained a continuous tradition of Greek learning. Monasteries and imperial libraries in Constantinople became repositories for ancient wisdom, and it's likely that Marcus's Meditations found refuge in one of these institutions. But even in Byzantium, survival wasn't guaranteed. The city endured sieges, fires, political upheavals, and the iconoclastic period when many books were destroyed. Every time a monastery was sacked or a library burned, humanity risked losing Marcus's thoughts forever. The key to understanding how the Meditations survived lies in the medieval manuscript tradition. Before printing, every book had to be copied by hand, letter by letter, word by word. This was painstaking work, often done by monks who spent their entire lives preserving ancient texts. The oldest surviving complete manuscript of the Meditations is the famous Codex Vaticanus Graecus 1950, housed in the Vatican Library. This manuscript dates to the 14th century, but it's almost certainly a copy of much earlier texts. Scholars believe it represents a tradition going back at least to the 10th century, meaning there's a chain of copying stretching back over 800 years. But here's what's remarkable. This Vatican manuscript is essentially our only complete source for the Meditations. Unlike popular ancient works that survive in dozens or hundreds of manuscripts, Marcus's private journal comes down to us through this single primary witness, plus a few fragments and later copies derived from it. Think about how precarious this is. If that one manuscript had been lost in a fire, or if one medieval scribe had decided it wasn't worth copying, or if the Vikings had successfully sacked Constantinople in 860 AD, we might never have known what the philosopher-emperor thought about life, death, and duty. The manuscript tradition also explains some of the puzzles about the text we have today. The Meditations, as we know them, don't follow a clear chronological order, and some passages seem repetitive or incomplete. This suggests that what survived might be a collection of Marcus's notes that were compiled and organized by later editors, possibly centuries after his death. The next crucial moment in the survival story came during the Renaissance, as the Byzantine Empire crumbled in the 15th century. Culminating in Constantinople's fall to the Ottomans in 1453, Greek scholars fled westward, bringing their manuscripts with them. This is how many ancient Greek texts, including the Meditations, finally made their way back to Western Europe after nearly 1,000 years. The first printed edition of the Meditations appeared in Zurich in 1558, published by Wilhelm Seelander. This was a watershed moment. Suddenly, instead of a single precious manuscript that could be lost forever, there were hundreds of printed copies. The text was finally safe from the vagaries of fire, flood, and warfare that had threatened it for over a millennium. But even this printing came with challenges. Renaissance scholars had to work from manuscript copies that contained errors accumulated over centuries of hand copying. They also had to grapple with Marcus's sometimes difficult Greek prose and philosophical concepts that didn't always translate easily into Latin or vernacular languages. The real breakthrough came in the 17th and 18th centuries when scholars began applying more rigorous methods to establish the best possible text. They compared different manuscript traditions, corrected obvious copying errors, and began producing more reliable editions that formed the basis for modern translations. Today, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations exists in hundreds of editions and dozens of languages. It's been translated into every major language on Earth, from Arabic to Chinese to Japanese. But this ubiquity masks how close we came to losing it entirely. Modern scholars continue to work with that same 14th century Vatican manuscript as their primary source. Digital photography and new imaging techniques have allowed them to read passages that were previously illegible, and advances in understanding ancient Greek have led to more accurate translations. But fundamentally, we're still dependent on that single medieval copy for our knowledge of what Marcus actually wrote. The survival of the Meditations also highlights what we've lost. Marcus Aurelius wrote other philosophical works that haven't survived. Ancient sources mention his letters, speeches, and other treatises on Stoic philosophy. We only have his private journal because some unknown person, probably a Byzantine monk or scholar, decided it was worth preserving when so much else was allowed to disappear. This makes every copy of the Meditations a minor miracle. When you read Marcus's advice to remember how brief life is, how vast the universe, you're accessing thoughts that have been preserved through nearly 2 millennia of wars, plagues, natural disasters, and the simple passage of time. The survival of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is ultimately a story about the power of ideas and the dedication of unknown preservers. Somewhere in the Byzantine Empire, a scribe carefully copied out Marcus's Greek text by candlelight. Somewhere else, a monk decided these pagan philosophical reflections were worth preserving alongside Christian texts. During the Renaissance, a scholar chose to publish this ancient work instead of something more commercially viable. Each of these decisions, made by people whose names we'll never know, kept alive some of the most profound thoughts on human nature ever recorded. Marcus's reflections on mortality, duty, and finding meaning in an indifferent universe speak to us today precisely because they were preserved through the combined efforts of countless individuals across the centuries. The next time you read the Meditations, remember that you're holding the end result of humanity's greatest preservation project. These aren't just the thoughts of a Roman emperor. They're proof that the most important ideas can survive anything history throws at them, as long as someone, somewhere, believes they're worth saving. In a world where information can be lost with a single server crash, the survival of Marcus Aurelius's handwritten journal reminds us that the most valuable human insights often depend on the most fragile chains of preservation. The Meditations made it to your hands through pure chance, human dedication, and the simple belief that wisdom transcends the ages. That might be the most Stoic lesson of all.